Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. Thank you so much for joining us as we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. That's our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. You're going to want to tune in for that. We're also here Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. following the news, and we stream live at those times at richarddugan.com. We podcast these programs on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, many other locations as well. And we also, believe it or not, are on YouTube. That's right. You can watch these conversations unfold, and I hope you'll subscribe as well as click notification so that when I post a new conversation, you'll be notified and you can tap in, tune in, listen in, and I hope you'll be educated and entertained and informed and all of the other good things that we're going to do today. We also ask that if you can support the work we're doing financially, we would be gratefully appreciative. We do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And the email address you'll want to input into the field where they say, so who are you sending this to? Send it to richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. And also spend some time going within during the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, and listen to that still small voice in that quiet, peaceful, calm place that I have learned over the years no one else can get to. So it's kind of like you're looking for that quiet place on the planet. Look, if you can find it, so can others. And that's often what happens. And then it starts out as maybe a one-horse town, and then it grows into 100 and 1,000. And the next thing you know, you have a metropolitan center with skyscrapers, and you've lost that little place. They can't do that when you go within. So keep that in mind, that nobody else can get there, and only you can travel there, and it's kind of cool. Our program today is right up my alley because I have always considered myself to be an optimistic kind of guy. The glass is half full, not half empty. I always like to query, I wonder what that glass is full of. And I guess it's up to me as to what to put in it. Well, my guest today is going to share with us his perspective on optimism, because he's written this book having to do with 7 steps for living as a loving-centered activist. The book is entitled Revolutionary Optimism. And it's like, okay, so what's the difference between that and quantum optimism versus just a straight old ordinary regular, unleaded optimism? We'll talk about that with our very special guest, Dr. Paul Zeitz. Paul, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. I've been looking forward to this. I loved our little conversation, a pre-interview conversation a week or so ago, where we kind of sort of met each other and got started on the process. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Richard, great to be here with you, and thanks for having me.
That is kind of my first question. How is this revolutionary optimism different from, hey, as I say, I'm just an optimistic guy with the glass half full. I don't think that we're headed for an apocalypse, a nuclear disaster, take your pick. I figure if it's going to happen, there's nothing I can do about it. It's kind of like being abducted by aliens. What are you going to do? If they're going to abduct you, they're going to abduct you. You can't stop them. Mother Nature is who she is, and you can't control other people. So how does your version differ from, say, just a regular, ordinary optimism?
Thank you for that great question. I think that myself, I created revolutionary optimism as a way of dealing with my own sense of despair and skepticism and at times hopelessness about the state of the situation in our country and our world, the level of polarization, the divides, the hatred that's unleashing, the violence that is ruling the roost in many ways. And I realized that I have a choice to make. I can actually generate myself with optimism. And that's the work of revolutionary optimism. It's really a choice about living on the path of love and liberating ourselves from our limiting thoughts and our sense that everything is fatalistic and what I do doesn't matter. And it actually then invites us to take love-centered action, or actually even realizing that we're already taking many love-centered actions as part of our life right now. And then it tries to weave into that self journey of living a love-centered life into the collective opportunity that we have to create our world with a love-centered focus as opposed to what we're experiencing now.
Have you always been optimistic?
No, I mean that's what I mean I was feeling skeptical and
Hmm.
despairing, and so I realized that I needed to do something about it.
Okay.
I have throughout my life like been attracted to understand the suffering and devastation of what's
Hmm.
going on in the world. I myself am a survivor of childhood sexual violence at the hands of my father as a very young boy. So I had an early trauma. So I was like witnessing systems of abuse and oppression that were around me and my family system. And then my work in the world really became focused on, as a physician, trained in preventive medicine and public health, looking at what are the determinants for human well-being and human happiness and human joy. So I would put myself in the most difficult of circumstances. Like I went down to sub-Saharan Africa in the late 90s when the HIV/AIDS pandemic was raging strong and people were dying around me. And even in the face of those dire circumstances, I saw the possibility of bringing the life-saving AIDS medicines and bringing prevention and investing in health systems so that people could live with human well-being.
Mm.
So I don't know. I think it's something in my constitution that's optimistic, and I'm revolutionary in that I want to see transformation happen as fast as possible in my lifetime, in your lifetime, in your listeners' lifetime, so that we can reap the benefits of that healing and transformation now.
I know when I interviewed the futurist visionary and architect Jacques Fresco of the Venus Project, fascinating gentleman. He has since passed on. I interviewed him, I think, when he was 94, and he shared with me all of the different aspects of his concept of a future civilization, if you will. And I thought, oh, this is great. I love this. So, is this going to happen in my lifetime? He says, well, probably not. And I'm going, darn it, because I really like it. It sounds like all right, some would say a utopia. Hey, look, we still have the characteristics, if you will, the personality with the emotions. We're still going to have the dynamics in relationship that we've had since the beginning. But as we raise our consciousness, and I think that's part of what you, through revolutionary optimism, are working towards doing, is helping people to raise their consciousness to understand that there is a better way, you know? Now, that's going to be, I would think you would also admit that's going to be a little different for each person, isn't it? Because what I consider to be a better world is cotton candy clouds and lollipop trees and chocolate fountains. And you might think of it a little differently as I want to do what I do to help people to feel better, to do these different things. And then the third person, and we have 8.1 billion people on the planet, so that means that we have 8.1 billion different perspectives on what is considered to be a better world, what that would look like. How do we how do we go about creating shall we call it a cohesive revolutionary optimistic view of the future? As you know, it's been said, choices that we've made have brought us here. And I even say this to my guests: do you know that the choices you made as a kid, a child playing in the dirt or whatever, actually have brought you right here to talk with me now? And I the same. And one of my guests said about the future, choices you make today will determine where you'll be in the future. And they said, true, but it's your perspective of what you believe the future will be as to what the choices you make today will be. So is that part of the dynamic that we need to sort of not necessarily accept or adopt somebody else's view, but we need to cultivate within ourselves, shall we say, an optimistic view of the future that we're going to be here. I mean, I want to live to be 100, so that means I've got to live to at least 2060. And I hope and I know there are certain predictions about certain things in 2035 and 2050, so forth. And I'm going, okay, that doesn't mean that that's locked in. So how do we, you have 7 steps in your book. Are any one of those steps having to do with the processing, the mental and even spiritual processing of what we would like the future to be so that the choices we make today could lead in that direction?
Yes, thank you for your question and for that inquiry. So the 7 steps are designed to help you navigate those questions and to be on a journey of exploration for figuring out what's your role and what's going on within you, and then how do you bring yourself and your energy and your visions for the future into reality. So if I can quickly just explain that the steps 1, 2, and 3 are really about personal growth, personal liberation, personal transformation, and practical tools. Maybe many of your listeners are already doing some of these things. For others, it's like a short package of opportunities to dig into what it means to wake up every day and ask the question of how can I serve? It helps you understand how your mind works. For me, I call it the inner dragon, this inner voice that tries to tell me that what I'm doing doesn't matter, or that it's not good enough, or it's hopeless. And realizing that there's another voice in my head that says, we can do better. I believe that we can come together and heal the divides between us. And then step 4, the heart of the book, the middle of the book, is called peace crafting. And that's really the ability for each of us to relate to each other. So it's about how you and I are talking with each other, how I am connecting and talking with your listeners, how I am with my family in meetings at work or in conferences, or how even organizations relate to each other. There's a way which I've created called peace crafting to create ways of building trust and embracing multiple perspectives. I frequently say what you said, which is that there's about 8 billion different at any one time. And what is happening now in our polarized state is that people are entrenched in believing that their point of view, their perspective, is the only right perspective. And I think I am more aligned with where you are, which is like there's billions of perspectives. In fact, even in my own mind, I have many perspectives, and I'm learning and growing and evolving every moment. So I don't think of myself as a static perspective. I'm a dynamic perspective.
Mhm.
And I find it really fascinating when people tell me what I think or tell me what my view is, because I feel like I don't even know what my view is sometimes when I'm on a journey of exploration. So the second half of the book, steps 5, 6, and 7, really go right at what you were asking about. Step 5 is called Imagineering, and it's about unlocking our political imaginations. It's unlocking our visions for a better future and a better world.
Mhm.
And what I have found so far with revolutionary optimism is that I'm not the only one that wants to aim for peaceful coexistence. I'm not the only one that believes that we should aim for our shared freedom, shared human dignity, shared opportunity for everyone to create a life of happiness and joy for themselves and their loved ones. So the more that we are able to share our visions and connect with others that have common visions, I believe then we can build love-centered movements and we can bring that new future forward. And then, the rest of the book goes on to the tactics and the practical approaches for bringing forward revolutionary transformation, love-centered revolutionary transformation.
Absolutely. It is something that many of us are working towards. Dr. Paul Zeitz is my guest. He's also the author of a couple of other books I want to mention. Waging Justice, it's a doctor's journey to speak truth and be bold, and Waging Optimism, ushering in a new era of justice. And we can talk about those in a little bit as we continue talking here, of course, about revolutionary optimism. And the subtitle is 7 Steps for Living as a love-centered activist. I have to wonder sometimes if that word activist and even the word activism, I'm going to say of late, have gotten a bit of a bad rap because it connotes protests. And of course, protests have not always been so peaceful. I find it fascinating in our day and age right now, where there are certain people who are protesting certain violence that's going on somewhere else in the world. The protests have become violent. I'm going, do you see the irony here, ladies and gentlemen? Do you understand that you are as guilty of the violence that you are wanting to be stopped somewhere on the other on another part of the globe? You need to open your eyes. And I think that's part of what we're doing here. I mean, we're not here to shame anybody, but, take a look at the positions that we're taking. And I have to tell you that when I see the face of certain individuals, when I'm going through and scrolling through certain videos, I like watching the shorts that they have like on YouTube or even on Facebook. And I scroll through them. And my favorites, of course, number one are the comedians, the short little clips of comedians.
Yeah.
Others are the do-it-yourself things, these little tricks that you can do to do this or that or the other thing for the DIY kind of deal. Because I've learned some things and I've used some of those in some of the home repairs and even the construction of certain things, and it's fascinating. But then I come across the images and short clips of individuals whose perspective is kind of what you described earlier. Oh, it's true. It's the truth. It's the way that it is. And you better get with the program because otherwise we're going to ram it down your throat. And I worked for 15 years for a Christian radio station, and it was kind of like that back then during the heyday of televangelism, especially. But that seems to have calmed a little bit. I think that there's a little bit more openness in some circles. There's a greater understanding that, especially within the broad umbrella, if you will, of Christendom, that, for example, the church was not for the saints. It was for the sinners. It was for the ones that, you said, we're going to hell, but that's where you wanted them, kind of thing. And do you see, once again, do you see the irony, ladies and gentlemen? This is, to me, something that I'm hoping a lot of folks will open their eyes to. I want to also let you folks know that there is a website, is there not, that people can go to find out more about you, about the various books that you have written. And of course, you're an author, an activist, a peaceful revolutionary. I find that also interesting too, and we'll talk about that as we continue. What website would you like to have our folks sent to? We'll link to it as well, so that they can find out more not only about peaceful activism, revolutionary optimism, waging justice and waging optimism. Is that going to be drpaulzeitz.org?
Yeah, that's a great website to learn about me.
All right.
Go to revolutionaryoptimism.com to get the book through amazon.com. Excuse me. And we have a Changemakers companion kit to help people explore love-centered activism as part of their lives. So I definitely recommend going to that book, that website as well. Sorry, revolutionaryoptimism.com.
And you're in social media, you're on Facebook and Twitter. Sorry, Elon, it's going to be Twitter to me. It's kind of like I'm originally from Phoenix, and we have a ballpark for where the Diamondbacks play. It will always be the Bob. I don't care who owns it. I don't care if it's Oscar Mayer ballpark. It's always going to be the Bob to me. You're on Instagram as well as LinkedIn, and you also have at unified movements links. You have some of those links as well. Unifymovements.org. Tell us about what this is about. We're kind of getting to that point where we're talking about this aspect of unity and unifying. Share with us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so I want to touch on a couple things that you mentioned. First of all, my theory is that many of us are love-centered activists, even if we don't realize it.
Mhm.
Because love-centered activism includes all the circles of service, including the work that we do to take care of ourselves or repair or heal ourselves. It's love-centered action in terms of the care that we give to loved ones in our family, our children, our parents, our other loved ones, our neighbors, and then anything that we're doing with our community. All counts as love-centered activism. So I am trying to destigmatize activism and recognize that many of us, if not all of us, are in some way a love-centered activist.
Mm.
And then I want to, as we go into the second half of the book, when we talk about peaceful revolutions, I want to share that my view is that the violent revolutions are already underway. The polarization, the economic inequality, the super crises like the climate emergency, the economic inequality where 1% of the population controls a great vast percentage of the wealth, and the gun violence on our streets, the mass incarceration of our population, the wars that we're involved in around the world, the massive investment in the military, and all the the violence that brings forward. And what I'm advocating for is that we consider ourselves as love-centered activists and we respond with a peaceful revolution. And that does mean that some people are willing to do protesting peacefully. Peaceful resistance is the way that I'm advocating for. There is violent resistance that's happening, for example, in some parts of the world. For example, I think the Palestinian Liberation Movement,
Mm.
who set up campus encampments across the country, I would argue that 99% of those people are coming at it non-violently from a peaceful perspective. And they were met with violent responses from the police forces.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm advocating for the universities, the politicians, the deciders about when and how to bring in police force to respond to peaceful resistance and peaceful direct action peacefully. Like these people were flying white flags, really, and they're not asking to be beat up and brutalized. And you can sometimes get do civil disobedience where you do get arrested. That is the right of people living in our country to
Mm.
do that. Now, not everyone has to take action that way. You can be doing peaceful resistance from your desktop, from your office. You can decide what things you want to buy and what things you don't want to buy. There's a whole range of different actions you can take. You don't have to be on the street doing a protest. So, love-centered activism can be implemented in so many different ways.
Well, what is again, it's another one of those kinds of ironies where a lot of times in order to change one's perspective in some of these different issues as we've been talking about, do you think it's at all important to be listening to those divergent opinions, even if they are in complete diametrically opposite direction from yours? I mean, is there something that we can learn there, or is that a waste? Is that an effort in futility in terms of the goal of changing the world? Again, going back to that, changing the world for the better. It's like, well, what good does it me to what good does it do to me for me to listen to former President 45 or Ted Cruz or any of these others on the other side of the aisle? I already know where they're coming from. I don't need to hear their stuff, or do I?
Great question. And that brings me back to peace crafting, which is step four.
Hmm.
I believe very strongly that that's one of the things that we have not, we've lost our skills in being able to be a listening friend and listening to multiple points of view and understanding where people are coming from. And while I might not agree with someone at the dinner table or some politician saying this, that, or the other thing, I do open up my mind to be a listening friend. And many people in this polarized state that we're experiencing, uh, get locked into the idea that their perspective is the only right perspective.
Hmm.
It's like my way or the highway perspective. And part of peace crafting is embracing multiple perspectives. I'm not saying you have to agree with every perspective, but embrace, explore, understand that there are multiple perspectives. And then the third part of it is to respond with love speech. And that is really hard because sometimes a perspective that someone's sharing is something I radically don't agree with, or I get triggered and I get angry and I get reactive to what they're saying. And I have to maintain control of how I speak and how I respond to be uplifting, even in the face of those circumstances. And then lastly, it's about building trust. And frequently, trust is seen, for myself anyway, I had an on and off switch, like I trust you or I don't.
Hmm.
And that can be polarizing. And so the way that I offer something called a trust-o-meter, which is a dynamic system of loving everyone
Hmm.
unconditionally, even people that I might think I hate, but I can say, oh, I love them, but I don't trust them. And
Right.
then it creates a way for them to go up or down on the trust-o-meter. And sometimes you do need a boundary and you need to cut people off for your own safety and your own well-being. And that's true with movements and organizations that you're working with. But most of the time, you want to keep it open so that you can always re-engage and to identify win-win opportunities as you're going through your efforts. So I think I do definitely believe that we need to listen and learn. And even by doing that alone, it diffuses the defensive nature of the interaction and people can find common ground.
I know we're running a public service announcement on this station that this program broadcasts on that talks about this one organization that is working to bring people together of differing views. And you have this short little snippet of conversation between two individuals, a man and a woman. The woman sounds like she's from a foreign country. And apparently they've been having a dialogue and they both recognize that the other's story is rather interesting.
Hmm.
And it's like they're actually listening to each other and even trying to find that common ground. Is that really where we want to start? Because I know this is the way it's done, say in mediation or in couples counseling, that kind of thing, where one of the first things I guess that they try to do is if there's a real rift, all right, what commonalities do the two of you have, or does this group have along with with this group? And is that part of maybe that part of the unifying process of again finding that common ground?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being a listener and embracing multiple perspectives, you can't help but learn and you can't help but grow. And you also are live into the that your perspectives are not static, that they're dynamic.
Hmm.
And sometimes we have to go into our minds and understand like what our mind is telling us. We have these narratives. And as part of Imagineering, we have like stories that we've told ourselves that we inherited from our family or from our society that says lesser of two evils is all we can achieve, um, there's no solution to this. It's impossible. And so by dismantling some of those limiting beliefs or limiting narratives, then we can unlock our political imagination and we can unlock our problem solving skills. And the data shows, and my own experience confirms, that 80 to 90% of people are really just seeking common sense solutions.
Mhm.
And it's other forces out there that are trying to polarize or atomize us so that we're divided, because then they can assert their power. And so it is part of unifying. If we could unify all the people that want to live together in peaceful coexistence, that want to live together by respecting all people as equal, and all people with human rights and human dignity, and the right to equality and freedom, then that majority could create a whole new social, economic, and political systems, in my view, that really center us in a love-centered way of relating with each other and how we relate to the planet, rather than what is happening now. It's kind of fear-based and greed-driven and extractive and oppressive oriented systems that are kind of leading us down a path of.
Yeah. One of the again, another one of those ironies that I have observed has to do with this whole issue of individual rights and freedoms,
Mhm.
which of course is part of the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, our founding documents that so many screamed and yelled about 4 years ago, that were so important. That you can't usurp my First Amendment rights, and so forth and so on. And then we turn around a scant year or so ago. I can't remember exactly how long ago it was. And one half of our population's rights, and again, we're not getting into the conversation about what specifics here, but we're talking about specifically reproductive rights
Mhm.
in, I believe, 26 of the 50 states are slowly being taken away, including, from what I understand, I wish I knew the exact states. I don't have that information at the tip of my tongue or in front of me. In vitro fertilization, people who want to have kids but can't, and there's another way, but no, you're not going to do that. No way. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute. You were screaming 4 years ago about how the government was taking away your rights because they were telling you you had to wear a mask, you had to wash your hands, and you had to stay 6 feet apart. And of course, at the beginning, you had to stay home. You couldn't go to work. And now you're telling half of our population, and you can't have kids. And it's like, and for women, all I know is because I had 4 sisters and of course a mother, and she had 6. And then one of my sisters had 2, and another one had 1. And I now am a great uncle because my mother is a great grandmother, and so on and so forth. So our lineage continues on in that regard. It's part of a woman, most women's makeup, their biology. They want to have offspring, but there are people, probably mostly men, who are telling them, no, you can't. You can't do it this way. You have to do it the old-fashioned way. And I'm just saying, again, I say, do you see the irony, ladies and gentlemen? So we've had these dichotomies. There was a
Yeah,
woman.
I think
Sure,
this is a
please go
really
ahead.
great example,
Go
because
ahead.
I think it's the political forces have created a debate in the political arena
Hmm. Hmm.
that polarizes people, that says you're for this view or you're for that view, and it's highly polarized. And it's also leading to these kind of laws and legal frameworks that are, being set up based on those polarized views. But if you really talked to the majority of people living in those states, they would disagree with those rules.
Hmm.
And so most people, I think it's 70 or 75% of the American public believe in reproductive freedom, reproductive rights, that those choices that people make should be the choices that people make in the privacy of their own home, and with the privacy of their meeting with their health provider, their doctor or their nurse or whatever.
Hmm.
And so I think this is where the politicization of reproductive freedom has polarized.
Hmm.
And people that don't want to access contraceptives or people that don't want to access in vitro fertilization, they don't have to do it, right?
Right.
It's not, yeah, but at the same time, those technologies like contraception, like in vitro fertilization, uh, should also be available to those that choose it because it
Hmm.
is available.
Yeah.
And when we get into abortion issues, I mean, it's a complicated issue, but I agree that we want to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. We want to reduce the number of abortions that are needed. But there are circumstances where they may be needed or women may choose to have that done. And we do need to recognize that, as you said a couple years ago, there was the first time since our country was formed where rights were taken away from people rather
Hmm.
than an expansion of freedom and rights.
Yeah.
And that is a paradox that we're going to have to reconcile.
Eventually we're going to have to reconcile it, but that's only one of course, many. And
Many.
again, and you're right. And I think the other element of it too is that there is a biblical adage that speaks to what you have just spoken about, especially with in regards to the politicization of a lot of these subjects, these topics. A house divided against itself. And that's exactly what's going on here, but also in other parts of the world, will not, cannot stand. And so, if you want to look at it from that standpoint, and people talk about the great American experiment, and this is from the pessimistic side, the experiment's failed. We're doomed. This country's over. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying if we were to continue down that road, which I don't believe we are, through the work you're doing through revolutionary optimism and these 7 steps, we are going to and have begun to turn it around. We have begun to say, look, we're both human beings, so we have a right to exist. We're both Americans, so we have a right to exist. Okay.
Mm.
And that's where we're going to stop. Okay. We belong and they belong and this person belongs and that person belongs. Doesn't matter what they believe. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on. It doesn't matter how much money they make or what level of education. They belong. They are part of what makes us who we are, not just as citizens of a country, but citizens of the globe, citizens of the world. Your thoughts?
Well said. I agree with what you said. I do think that that is the objective of revolutionary optimism is for us to see that we are all interconnected, that we have what is called a common humanity, and that our journey is individual and it's collective at the same time, and that we have the opportunity to break down those silos, those separations that we have created between people based on race, based on gender, based on economic class, based on political party. And if you start to break down those fragments, those silos rather, then you realize that the vast majority of us, over 80%, agree that we want common sense solutions. We want to live peacefully with each other. We want to live with a healthy relationship with the planet. And we want to be able to make sure that the planet is survivable for our children, grandchildren, and future generations.
Mhm.
Most people agree with that when you get into it. I've concluded for myself as a doctor, we were trained to do diagnosis and then solution. And so my diagnosis is that we're experiencing in all the turmoil and all the division and all the political in political craziness, I'll say it that way, uh, is um, is a sign of constitutional rot. Scholars talk about constitutions or organizing legal frameworks that establish a country like ours go through cycles of creation and renewal, and then they go through cycles of rot. And we're definitely in a phase of rot because we haven't had an expansion of rights in over 100 years since the suffrage, the right of women to vote.
Hmm.
And ever since then, we've been, teetering around the edges of expanding rights. And the Constitution isn't meeting the needs of a rapidly changing world. We're not addressing the information, communication, and technology revolutions that are already underway. And we need to create a more robust legal constitutional order that is fit for purpose with the times and for the future. And by the way, the founders never thought it would last more than 10 years. Now it's
Yeah.
already 237 years. They thought it would get amended and evolve more rapidly than humans have allowed it to evolve. So I think we're approaching a time when that majority that I keep mentioning, if we can rise, then we can create a political process, and we can recreate we can amend or transform the Constitution so that we can live a more love-centered, we can create love-centered social, economic, and political systems. I truly believe we can do that, and we can do it now, and we can do much better than we're doing now.
And what's interesting in what you just stated is that the founders, regardless of how long they thought it would last, they put provisions in the very document to make changes. People like to refer to the Constitution, for example, as it's a living document. It's a living, breathing document. Some consider it sacred and holy, and I know we won't go there. But if it's a living, breathing document, then it has to evolve. And they put provisions in there for it to evolve. And that's one of the things that I find so interesting with people who talk about how, no, we don't want to change the Constitution. It's like, well, then you haven't read it.
Right.
Well, another one of those. Do you see the irony in what you're saying, ladies and gentlemen? We're talking with Dr. Paul Zeitz, and we're talking about revolutionary optimism here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and as I have said many, many times on this program, I am an optimist. I am excited every time I get up in the morning and I'm being awakened up by my dog who's barking, saying, "Give me a cookie, and then I'll go outside." That's the order, by the way, that he wants it. Cookie first, go outside second.
He
Which
seems like he has you well trained.
he does indeed. He does indeed. But I love where we live. I love working out in nature, whether it's having to, cut up a tree or cut down the weeds, the grasses that get tall to not only make the place look better, but also help to protect it from potential wildfires. And so excuse me, I honestly believe that there's so much more. There's so many more opportunities that we don't even know about. Why do you, and this is another question, not just for you, Doc, but also for our listeners. Why do you think that we have what is referred to as an immigration problem? Why do you think all of these people, and I don't want to say all, but most of them, are coming here in the first place? It's the phrase that the people who came through Ellis Island probably had on the tip of their tongue. I'm going to the land of opportunity. And the mom and pop businesses that sprung up in the late early 1900s, many of them went on to become global corporations. It took 50, 60, 70, maybe 80 years, but they or their ancestors, the ones who came over, they had heard and then began to experience the land of opportunity. Well, there are those of us who were born and raised here, right, Paul, who we don't even recognize. Oh, this is the land of opportunity, but not just for the immigrants. For me too. I was born here. I should have a better shot at getting what I want and what I need, and for fulfilling my dreams and living my purpose. You are, I don't want to say on the side, are also an epidemiologist, but it's one of the hats that you wear. By the way,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, did you acquire that degree in epidemiology in March or April of 2020 when the pandemic was called? Because many of the members of the media suddenly knew everything there was to know about the coronavirus. And I'm going, wow, they're all I'm not an epidemiologist. I have no clue about this thing. And so I have to listen to others. I don't think
Mm.
you did in 2020. Why did you choose epidemiology as a practice?
Yeah, so I was training as a physician, and I was in the hospital, and I was treating patients for chronic diseases and And I just cancer and heart disease and lung diseases and kidney disease. And I realized that I appreciated the high level of medical care that I was being trained in. And I certainly want the best possible medical care for when I'm in need of it or my loved ones are. But I realized that the whole system was geared towards curative care. Mainly, most of the money, I think it's 80% of the resources, are focused on the last 5 years of life. And I actually felt like my interest and my focus was on human well-being and how could I found a specialty in public health and preventive medicine, and I got a specialty training, and I became an expert on the health of the population. What are the factors that lead to health and well-being? What are the risk factors that bring disease forward? So yeah, it was interesting during COVID when everyone became an epidemiologist of sorts, and we're definitely living in a new era of equitable access to information in a way, because in the past it would be public health authorities that would speak the truth and people would follow. And now with the internet and all the outlets of information, there's all kinds of information that's circulating, and people then are forced, or they have the opportunity to choose to discern for themselves. They actually have freedom to listen, learn, discern, and figure out what they think the truth is. And that had pros and cons, as we saw during the COVID pandemic.
Hmm.
Um, but I think one of the things that I think this touches on is freedom. And what I learned by when I was studying the literature and creating revolutionary optimism is that people have a fear of freedom. People have a fear of freedom. They don't want to have to figure it all out. They want to follow what a political leader is saying, or what a religious leader is saying, or what a celebrity is saying, because it's easier to follow the groove of someone else that's already has a point of view and a perspective.
Hmm.
Because if you assert your freedom of discernment and freedom of decision making, it's work. You have to really work at it.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's harder. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the paradoxes that revolutionary optimism is trying to take on. It's trying to invite people to embrace that work with your other love-centered allies to really explore what do I believe,
Mm.
and what do I want to take a stand for, and that could be a learning and a growing journey.
Yeah. And that raises some interesting questions in regards to discernment. And I'm wondering how important is, as I referenced at the front end of the program, listening to that still small voice, going within and meditating if necessary, if you choose to, on a particular item. There's a technique that I use that actually employs the still small voice, but in a little different method. It's called kinesiology, or they call it muscle testing. You can do it in the grocery store if you want. I've often even when organic foods became they started just coming out and getting bigger and bigger, and people wanted to buy it, and I'm saying, what difference does it make? Well, they would tell me what difference it makes and so forth, and I said, wait a minute, you can slap a label on anything and call it whatever you want. That doesn't mean that's what it is. And here in California, we had a strawberry grower who claimed that his strawberries were grown organically, and you have to have certification here in California. So when the agency that certifies did an audit of this particular farm, they found out that you're not organic, and they got hefty fines. I don't know if they were shut down or what have you. And it proved my point. You can put a label on anything. So this issue of discernment, if that's the correct word, I was going to use the word discrimination. So I think discernment is a better word to use.
Mm.
Discrimination is a little too charged negatively. But what about that? Should we go ahead and do our research, But then to determine whether it's, shall we say, right for us, or let's say right for me, do I need to consult a higher power in that regard, or a
Yeah,
higher voice?
definitely. I think step two is focusing on self-liberation, and it's about getting in touch with that inner intuition, that inner small voice. It's like slowing down, doing practices, kinesiology or meditation or chanting or yoga or being in nature. Some people find that as a way, or exercise, people find as a way that they can still their mind. And then it is a discernment. It is a set of making choices. And it's also like not being stuck. Like if I choose to do this, if I make one choice for this period of time and I'm observing and witnessing it, I consider it like an experiment, that I'm running an experiment, and that I have the right to shift gears. I can shape shift and I can transform. Um, but that those practices also allow us to get out of our small mind, if you will, the mind that is trying to protect our own self-interests, the mind that can be ruled by our inner dragon, that's a self-protection system, and see and realize that we're actually all interconnected, and that what we do is interrelated to what everyone else does. And so that gives us another perspective when we get stuck in ourselves and
Yeah.
in our separateness.
Yeah. Another one of the paradoxes that in dealing with this now, in terms of self-liberation, step two, actually the first portion of it is the angry activist. And it made me, and immediately when I read that, the first thing that came to my mind was two events. And strangely enough, there is disagreement as to what exactly happened on January 6, 2021. I was watching it live, and there was no question in my mind as to what was happening. If that was a tour group going to visit the Capitol, then I would say they were all members of Hell's Angels. I didn't realize that the entry points were windows that you had to break through in order to enter. And so the people who say, "Oh no, 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 this was not a coup, this was not an insurrection, this was just a bunch of people going to visit the Capitol," I said, "Okay, then let's take this to its most logical conclusion." I was watching live at around 5:30 in the morning Phoenix time, the airplanes crashing into World Trade Center towers 1 and 2.
Hmm.
It didn't happen. Okay. If that was not an insurrection, then 9/11 was CGI. It was Hollywood pulling the wool over our eyes. Oh no, but we have all of these people that are missing. They're dead and the buildings aren't there. It doesn't matter. I don't believe it because I wasn't there any more than I was in Washington, D.C. on the 21st, on the 6th of January 2021. I mean, it's like this is kind of where we are today when it comes to the conversations or arguments that we are having over what is and isn't real. And I can't remember who it was who said this. It might have been, I think it was Carl Sagan, but I could be wrong on this. But the comment was having to do with if you are having a debate with someone over their beliefs, you have a fool for a debater, and it ain't the other person, because you can't debate beliefs. If you believe that you have two heads, who am I to argue? I may only see one, but I'm not going to tell you don't, because those are your beliefs. And it kind of goes back to something you said earlier. When working for the Christian station, they would talk about a personal relationship with God, a personal relationship with Jesus. I think it was when we were talking about individual rights. And yet I had ministers and pastors tell me that I wasn't right with God, and I wasn't saved, and I wasn't ready to go to heaven because I didn't believe the way they wanted. And I'm my brain just about exploded because I'm going, wait a minute. But you just told me this is a personal relationship, my one-on-one relationship with the Creator. How is this any of your business? Okay. So when we're talking about, so this is sort of where the beliefs of another individual, first of all, we need to learn how to respect them. I heard a comedian say once, comparing Christianity, or actually he was referring to Catholicism, and Scientology. You don't believe that there's a mothership out there behind the moon that's waiting to pick us all up. And I don't know the ins and outs of Scientology. And yet you do believe, and then they go down the laundry list of all of the things that are listed that are pretty bizarre and strange and unusual in the Bible, Old and New Testament. Okay, wait a minute. How can you believe one and not the other?
Hmm.
Because they both seem, because you believe that this text is divine, kind of like some people believe the Constitution is divinely inspired. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it is. I'm just posing the question. So, that kind of comes to that angry activist aspect. And of course, then it goes, as you just described, embracing inner work and the discernment. Is that where we need to maybe step back our personality, our ego, for the sake of the step of not only peacecraft, but also unification, unifying?
Yeah, so step two is really about self-liberation, and each of us has within us a defense system, which I call the inner dragon, which is basically designed to protect us, and it responds to trauma. So typically, it's freeze, fight, flee, or appease are the four trauma responses that we each have. And I think sometimes when we're feeling a state of trauma, we default into those states and we don't even realize it. And we live into those states. I know I have. For example, I had a lot of appeasement going on where I I was triggered, and I would then be going along to getting along. I didn't want to disrupt anyone or anyone else that I felt like had power over me. And I got trapped into those kinds of dynamics for
Mm.
many times in my life. So yeah, I mean, I think that the idea that we can understand how that works in our minds, and then we can then uh, lift ourselves into our highest self, and then we can make the discernments about what reality is and what truth is, not from our triggered defense system or protective system, but more from our open heart and our love-centered place. And I think that's what Jesus and many spiritual teachers were trying to teach us, is that we have the power to create ourselves and access that part of our brains and our hearts so that we can then determine what choices we make. So I don't know how to, I'm trying to figure out how to bridge this to what you were saying about the different versions of reality on January 6th, where clearly there was a violent component to what was going on. There may have been people with love-centered intentions, and it got violent. And so that's where violence beget violence. There was a counter-violence pushback, and unfortunately, that led to I was shot. I live in DC,
Hmm.
and I remember for months after that, there were like they fenced in the whole capital area, and the National Guard was out there stationed. I never imagined that I would see that in my own country. I had lived overseas in many countries and had seen that.
Hmm.
So I don't know how to reconcile. I would say the majority of people in the United States and globally saw that as a violent set of activities versus a innocuous tour
Hmm.
based on objective reality. So there is a truth, and then there are people that are out there distorting truth and creating alternative realities, and that is part of the challenge of the times that we're living in.
Indeed, indeed. And it's nothing new, because going back, I don't know, maybe 14, 1,500 years or more, I did some reading on this, and apparently there was a propaganda war of sorts between those who wanted to disseminate all of the, as I call them, ancient wisdom teachings, the 66 books of what has become our modern day Bible, along with the apocryphal writings, and then anything else that was found along the way, and those who only wanted the 66 books released. And it was, and this was the way it was phrased in what I was reading, it was a propaganda war. And
Hmm.
of course, the church won.
Hmm.
And of course, that's usually the case when you're talking about, conflict. Whoever wins gets to write the history, or does write the history. Although I have heard it said that in some of the conflicts that we might read about over the centuries, there were those who were on the losing side who did write their side of the story, so to speak,
Yeah.
and so forth. And so we sometimes centuries later we learn the truth. We get both sides. It was kind of like when we were celebrating the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus back in 1992, and I remember growing up with, of course, that wonderful little poetic thing. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and I knew one version of that history. But
Right.
in 1992, I heard three different versions. One, he was a saint. One, he was Satan. And the third, he was somewhere in the middle.
Hmm.
I'd lean more towards somewhere in the middle myself, because nobody, as it said, nobody's perfect. We all have our picadillos, as they say. So yeah, I think that discernment is so vital, so important now more than ever. I myself try to stay away from social media in respect. As I said, when I'm going through some of those little short clips, as soon as I see the face of somebody I recognize whose perspective is what it is, I scroll up, because I want to laugh, or I want to learn how to do this, or the DIY kind of thing. I don't want to get my mind and my heart bogged down in that stuff. And quite honestly, it doesn't matter whether it's from the left or the right. I don't want to hear it anymore. I have heard enough. I'm going to trust my heart and my discernment, and
Hmm.
be that revolutionary activist that you are,
Hmm.
and focus on revolutionary optimism, which is, of course, ladies and gentlemen, the title of his book, and he being Dr. Paul Geitz. And we are talking about, I think, I am just blown away by what you have presented here. And we've just barely scratched the surface, I'm sure. drpaulzeitz.org, drpaulzeitz.org is the website, which we will be linked to at our podcast and video cast as well, so that folks can find out more. And of course, you are on Facebook and Twitter, or if you want to call it X, okay, fine, Elon. Uh, and then, of course, Instagram and
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I make
All of
my
them. Yeah.
all of them. He's as there was a wonderful piece that came out. I think it was in the 70s, basically, and I think it was a country western singer who used to do these spoofs, these satires, and one of the lines in one of his spoof songs was about Elvis. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. Well, Paul is everywhere. He's everywhere. No, he's not Elvis. As
I'm not
as
Elvis.
far as far as I know, this is not Elvis. But we're certainly glad that you're with us here on Tell Me Your Story. I want to thank you for your contribution to uh, not only an ever-changing world, but to facilitating some changes that are actually for the betterment of all, not just the people on the left or the middle or the right, for everybody. Everybody, I mean, it seems hard to say this, but everybody that's on the planet has a right to be here. You don't have to like them, but recognize that they have a role to play just like you and I do. I used to ask this question at the end of the program. I have three questions that I will ask you at the end of the program here in just a couple of moments. But what do you consider to be your life's purpose?
My life's purpose is to be a healer, and to be a healing presence with those around me. And I have figured that out repeatedly during different phases and really tried to live into that throughout my life. And I feel that was my deployment. That's my soul's deployment.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I do have those three final questions I do want to ask you before we wrap things up. But before I do, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices. And let me tell you something, on this program, you've been given a heck of a choice. And it is always your choice to go whatever direction you choose, because you, as a human being here on the planet, have free will, just like I do. But I will never, and I've said this before, Paul, on this program, when I share my observations and even my beliefs, they're mine. Okay. I will not and have never put them on anybody else.
Hmm.
That is not my place. My place is
Beautiful.
try to turn those beliefs into knowing, as Greg Braden shared with us, um, in one of his books that came out many years ago. We had him on our program. We talked about that. And he said, one day we will no longer believe, we will know. And
Hmm.
that's where I'm headed, is to the knowing.
Hmm.
And again, we thank you folks for listening and watching this program, which is here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. That's our special edition. Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. And we hope that you'll tune into all 9 programs. There'll be podcasts available on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, and we're on YouTube, where you can watch these interviews and you can watch the conversation unfold as we talk about these various subjects. In this case, with Dr. Paul Geitz. And we also hope that you can help us out financially, give us some support in that regard by going to PayPal, which is there for your security as well as ours. Richard at Richard Dugan is the email that you want to put in the field when they ask who you're sending these funds to. And we greatly appreciate that. We'll take energetic support too. We're not, I mean, yeah, we're picky, but we're not picky. I mean, I can't pay the hosting bill with specifically with energy, but maybe I can tap into, plug it in somewhere and make it work for us. Be that as it may, we also ask that you take time during the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to spend that time in contemplation, and discernment, if that's what you choose, in that quiet, peaceful, calm place, listening to the higher self, as some call it, the still small voice, the divine voice, whatever the case might be. We hope that you'll take time to do that. And with all of that being said, we now turn our attention back to our guest here on the program, Dr. Paul Geitz. And of course, the title of the book, once again, is Revolutionary Optimist. He is an activist as well. I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about as well. And we certainly hope, as well as being an activist, he's an author. He's a peaceful revolutionary. And we thank him so much for being with us. Those 3 questions start with the first one here, Paul.
Hmm.
Who is Paul Geitz?
Paul Zeitz is
Zeitz.
a.
What am I saying? Who am I thinking
It's
of?
okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm a man. I'm a father. I have 5 sons. I have 2 grandchildren. I'm married for 33 years. I'm just a regular person, working, living on this planet and trying to serve in the best way that I can.
Paul Zeitz is my guest. And the second question that we have for you is, and by the way, congratulations on those 5 sons. That must have been a lot of fun, let me tell you. I mean, it was just me and my brother, and I had 4 sisters, and he and I were certainly a handful, to say the least, to my parents. What gets you up in the morning?
What gets me up is the gift of life. When I realize that I'm breathing and that I'm alive and that I'm surrounded by loved ones, I wake up and say, it's go time. Get up and go
Mm.
and serve. Find how you want to serve today.
And finally, what was your best day?
Well, I could say today is the day. That would be, a parochial kind of answer. Like every day is the best day. The best day of my life?
Hmm.
Hmm. I think the best day of my life, I would say, is the day that I became a father. I had this experience with my firstborn son where my heart cracked open and I experienced unconditional love, like just pure love. There was no limit, no hesitation to it. And I was like, whoa, that's what they're talking about. And I'll never forget that moment, that experience.
I will have to have that experience in my next lifetime. Animals, they're a wonderful thing. We treat them as our own children, but they are not quite the same. And maybe one day in a future life, I may have the same experience my father did. Sadly, of course, at the loss of his eldest daughter 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And he says, you know what? I don't want to be here anymore. And
Hmm.
I can appreciate where he's coming from. I don't fully understand it, but at the same time, I mean, he had five others. Come on, Dad. But no, it was his firstborn, and they have a serious, a very significant role that they are playing in both a
Hmm.
mother and father's life, and so I can appreciate that. I guess I could say I'm lucky that I was the firstborn male, but I had two others before me, and that's okay too. So it's something that, man, like I said, maybe one day I will have that experience. But I've always tried to pass on a lot of what we've talked about here on this program with kids. With my first wife, we had a two car driveway, and there was a basketball pole with a backboard and net and everything that I had put up, and I had the kids come over from the neighborhood to come over and play, and
Hmm.
it was in my 30s, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, it just was. I loved it, having them over and just saying, look, we're not competing here. We're just having some fun. Okay. We're just playing. This is not the NBA. All right. So just relax.
Hmm.
And for the most part, it was really a wonderful experience. So I applaud you on bringing five new souls into this world. And of course, they bringing two new souls. And in this case, it's interesting. You had five boys and your grandchildren are girls, I
No, one
believe.
boy, one girl. Yeah.
One boy. Okay, there's Sonny, Zion, and then Birdie Lou, who you dedicated the book to.
Yeah, exactly. I really, the light that they bring into my life and when I see when I imagine their life journey, that is what is inspiring me. That's what's fueling my passion for revolutionary optimism and my desire to share that with you and others.
May I ask you real quickly? I don't, again, I assumed that it was girls. Sonny, it sounded to me like a girl's name, but I was wrong. So I don't want to assume that your faith, or I like to refer to as philosophy, is Judaism. Am I correct or incorrect?
Well, I definitely was born a Jew, and I have I was raised as a Jew and all that. And I think right now I still practice Judaism. I've decided to focus my approach to Judaism through what's called the Song of Songs, or Shir HaShirim in Hebrew. It's a sacred text that made it into the canon barely, and it really is focusing on the relationship that we have with each other and ourself, and with the great mystery is what I call it, the unknowable beyond. And that has been my path. And that's really brought me into a interspiritual sensibility, or an interspiritual awareness. So I really believe that there are many paths and one truth in terms of love being at the center of what all these paths are taking us towards.
Mm.
And so I try to bridge and experience and create spaces where all faiths, even non-believers, are welcome, and that we can learn from each other. And Judaism is one pathway. It's not the only pathway, and all the pathways are leading towards a common destination
Yeah.
of a love-centered reality.
Yeah. Well, you went in the direction that I was going to ask the question, so now I don't even have to ask it. You just went there intuitively, and I thank you for that. And again, I thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you, Richard. Great discussion. I appreciate you. And thanks to all your listeners for checking out Revolutionary Optimism.
And I would love to have you back to continue this conversation and talk about waging optimism and so forth, and just continue this conversation so that it elicits new thought, hopefully, from those listening and watching here on Tell Me Your Story. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy. To my friends, Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.